Welcome to the Confident Grief Coach Show.
Hi, I am Pat Shevland, founder of the Confident Grief Coach School.
And I'm Cami Thielander, Advanced Certified Grief Coach and founder of Embodied Grief Support Coaching.
We believe as professionals, it is important to have a forum where we can gather as a community to really talk about all things body, mind, and spirit when it comes to grief.
We will be sharing stories, discussing thought-provoking ideas, and interviewing others who work in the field of grief and those who have the lived experience of creating lives of peace and purpose after experiencing deep loss.
Information about Cami's Embodied Grief Support Coaching Services or the Confident Grief Coach Certification Program can be found in our show notes below.
Thank you for joining us at the Confident Grief Coach Show. And if you like what you're hearing or would like us to focus on a specific topic in the future, please hit the like and subscribe button to stay connected.
Hey, Cami, how you doing?
Hi, Pat. Doing well. How are you?
Good, good. It's a sunshiny day here in Minnesota today, which is awesome. We've had like the most amazing, well, you live in Minnesota, the most amazing winter so far. So sunshine, can just be such a healing thing for us just to have that little bit of brightness, right?
Yep, especially when it's cloudy. It's like those little things that we take for granted when we don't have them, but when they're here, yeah, soaking it all in.
Yep. Well, I wanted to talk today about it's been interesting because over the weekend, today is Tuesday, but over the weekend, I had two different people kind of reach out to me. One actually reached out specifically to me because she's going through a pretty significant grief events, I should say. So it's like anticipatory grief, but there's also the death of someone who is very close to her. It's the 1 year anniversary. So she's like got this tsunami of things going on. And the other one is a friend of mine who his brother is a friend of mine. We've known each other for decades, and his brother became very ill very quickly. And so both of these people kind of have that anticipatory grieving going on. And I thought this would be a great conversation because I know that you're trained as a death doula and that type of thing. And I thought maybe we could just talk a little bit about anticipatory grief. I can share a little bit more about what some of these people have shared with me. And then if you could help us, like, how can we help ourselves when we're in the midst of it? How can the people that are listening to us, maybe, what are some tools or resources that they could lean into when they're dealing with this? So how does that sound for a topic of the day? And a
Yes,
nice sunshiny day.
yes, right. I know it's like here we are alive in the sunshine, and then it's like let's talk about end of life and death and all of the grief that comes with just anticipating that transition. So yeah, I'm all for it.
Yeah, how do
Um,
we bring a little light into that, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah. And making that whole process just as smooth as possible. And I think that's different for like everybody in every situation and really like what's coming up and what are the challenges that are here and what are you really like ready to be present for.
Yep.
So yeah, would just love to hear a little bit about like what are some of the things that are coming up with these people in your life that have been challenging for them? Like yeah, how is this process going for them and what kinds of things are they seeking?
Well, the one person who reached out to me, it's interesting because it's had me really think about my own personal experience with my mother. My mom lived with us for 7 years. We really took a lot of her caregiving for probably the last 10 years of her life, even when she lived independently. But when I wrote of my book, about multi-generational living and supporting the caregivers, living life in the middle, I had an excerpt in there about watching my mother. People will always say, "Oh, I'm so sorry," or "I'm so sorry you're going through this." And I thought about, am I going to really be sorry when she dies? Because
Mhm.
her body kept deteriorating little by little, and I was losing the person. I was grieving the person that I had in my life who was vibrant and smart and on top of everything and just totally self-sufficient become kind of slowly a shell of that person.
Mm.
And so the one gal who reached out to me this weekend is going through that with her father. And she said, you know, Pat, I've been losing bits and pieces for 15 years.
Yeah.
And, you know, and so I said, yeah, that's, you know, there's that anticipatory grief that you're going through. And it's not like he is in hospice or anything like that. And I, you know, where the other person I talked to, his brother got ill very quickly. And so he's hospitalized. They know the gravity of the situation. You know, it really depends upon if the medical care is going to help get him out of his medical situation. But they also know that his heart and major organs are just not doing well.
Mm.
So it's like you have this, I guess there's, yeah, you're grieving that, and you know that with your father, right? With ALS, your dad, but this like piece by piece, it's almost like this long-standing, little by little, you're already losing that person. And so
Yeah.
by the time that they are dying, there's almost a relief factor
Mhm.
with it. And then there's some of that guilt that goes with it. And so I wish I would have had, when I think about going through all this with my mom, some better insight into how I might, you know, I intuitively did some things, but how I might have been able to help myself in that and my own grieving and self-care, and also how I could have even made it a better transition, even though it was a 10-year journey. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Uh-huh. Yeah, and I'm curious, like you mentioned you had some intuitive senses as far as like how to navigate that situation. Like how was that process for you? What was coming up for you and how did you respond or process the grief that comes with that?
I didn't realize it was grieving, I guess, early on. You know, it was not until she, you know, maybe a year before she died that it hit me that, wow, I have been grieving my mom for a lot of years now. So when I didn't realize that, but you slowly saw the deterioration, I went into caregiver mode. And so it was not about me, it was about her and how can I make sure she's safe, that she's eating, that she's bathing, that she's getting all the things that she needed
Sure.
over those years. And it wasn't until like that year before so that I realized, wow, I have been slowly watching her fade away for a lot of years.
Mhm. Yeah, like going into that role of support person and my needs are secondary to you because you can't do things on your own, so I must help you with them. And then that kind of it's like a doing, it's like we're active and we're doing things and we have a role, we have a purpose, and we might not realize like, oh, what do I even think about this situation? What's actually happening until it's like, wow, actually I've been watching her deteriorate for so long.
Yep.
What is this? How do I really feel about this? What does this mean to me? I've been so focused on like being in all of it and just like
Yep.
doing what needs to be done and doing all the responsibilities, which can be helpful too, right? To like stay busy and have a purpose and have a role. But then where's that balance of like, well, I need to meet my needs at the same time as a caretaker? Like, what kinds of things do you do to, or had you done with your mom to support yourself in being a caretaker and doing that sustainably for 10 years?
Well, I mean, you know, we did a multi-generational family living gig for like the last probably 4 or 5 years. Um, but I don't know, you know, that's what supported me is I had a tribe, my family, who could come in and give me respite. And I
Sure.
think that's a huge thing in that is kind of that respite. But like the gal that I'm talking to, she doesn't live with her parents. You know, her parents are, you know, on their own. But it's just that every time that something, you know, medically shows up and they're serious, things that show up, it's like there's another little piece slowly being taken away.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's power in recognizing when there is that shift or a change or, some milestone in some way that, stepping back and holding space for that and being with the grief and honoring like what's coming up for you. I know with my dad it was a fairly fast progression, but there were times where it was like, oh, like you can't feed yourself anymore. And that was just like, a piece of you, like you cannot use your hands. Like a basic need of feeding yourself or walking is being
Mhm.
taken away. And it was like, I think it's easy to jump into that role of here, let me feed you, and here, let me do something to help you. And that can be a really helpful way to find our purpose as we are going through these transitions, but then to step back and have that respite and really be with what is coming up for me. How do I feel about this? What emotions are surfacing as I'm watching this happen? And then being present for those emotions that are coming up, then how do I process this? What does this mean to me to take care of my needs right now? And that looks
Yeah.
different for everyone, and those skills are different for everyone and depending on what you need. But I think like creating that time and space to really be with your grief and feel it and spend time with it and process, digest it just a little bit at a time so that it doesn't all hit you later when it's like, holy crap, what just happened? Like
Right.
all of these years went by and I didn't even really realize that this person was dying in front of my eyes.
Yep. And what could I have done differently during all those years where if you are really present with it early on, when the diagnosis is made or that first really big health event occurs,
Yeah.
how might a person maybe shift and incorporate in what does this mean? What does this mean for me? What am I feeling? And what does it mean for me to help support them? And in hindsight, always 2020, right? It would have been, I always wanted to, record my mom and ask her questions and record her, and I never did.
Mm,
Um, and then the further that she progressed in her aging, the less that she was really interested in and could stay engaged in that.
sure.
And then also the person who is your loved one who's kind of going through the challenges, right? May not want to do it.
Mhm.
So any thoughts on that? Like how do we create, an honoring or, making sure that when it does get to that end of life that we have done so that we don't have the regrets.
Right, yeah. I think just like what you said, like there's power in that presence when we can really recognize and be honest and truthful about, okay, this is the reality of the situation. I think when there's something scary, especially of course when it involves a terminal illness or something, it's natural to want to run away from it and to not spend time with it and to be so focused on, doing the treatments and saving their life. It's like there can almost be a sense of denial about the truth of the reality of the situation that can cloud our ability to be present and to think about these things that are coming up.
Mhm.
And in doing so, when we, run away from our feelings or run away from the reality of the situation, then that dismisses the opportunity to make those powerful decisions about, wow, I really wish I would have had this conversation, or I have all these unanswered questions, or I have these regrets, or all these things that come up that we realize at the end, wow, if I would have spent more time thinking about this, things I could be feeling a lot differently now. So I think like when that's happening, having the courage and having the resources and support to be able to think about, okay, this is what's happening. Now, what do I do? Like, I realize that my time is limited or my time with my loved one is limited. How do I want the rest of my time to go? What would it look like for me to have a meaningful end of life? What does it mean to have a quality time with the time that I do
Right.
have left? And then what do I want to create with it? I was speaking with someone today who her grandparent is reaching the end of their life, and they've got a whole legacy project happening where now it's a really great excuse for her to spend quality time with her grandpa talking about all of the memories of his life. So now he gets an opportunity to think about, reflect back on his life and what his life meant to him and all the things he got to see and accomplish. And then she gets to hear that from him and hold space for this process as he's reaching the end of his life, while also creating a project out of it, something tangible that she can remember him by, a book for all these memoirs, or a slideshow and pictures, whatever it might be, like thinking about, okay, here's the time we have left. Is there something that we want to do with it? Do you want to go travel? Is your health, like, is that something that's available to you? Is there something on your bucket list that you really want to see before you go? What kinds of things do you have to tell people still? Are there letters you want to write? I think it can go in so many different directions, and
Yeah.
it really just depends on like, where are you at? What is this person like ready to do? Maybe they don't want to think about any of those things and they really do want to be having all the treatments, everything that they can be doing to save their life. And that's okay too, but that just might mean that your last days are spent in a hospital. That
Hmm.
might look very different than if you decided you wanted to have your last days spent at home or spent in some care facility or whatever it might be. But I think being present for making those decisions is like the most important and sometimes the hardest part, because that requires that we be with the momentous, like, reality of the situation that can come with all of the grief and the realization like death is coming, or these little pieces of these, the
Right.
way that our life was, are like these pieces are falling away, there's shift happening, and sometimes it's really big and some days it's those little things that just like add up that can kind of eat away.
And they're grieving a lot, but you may not even realize it. But I was just thinking as you're talking is, death doulas typically will get involved when someone goes into hospice or something like that. How often, I mean, it just made sense to me having a doula actually enter in to someone's life when much earlier,
Yeah.
when just like you're talking to this gal and she's doing a legacy project, with her grandfather. And I'm just thinking, wow, if I would have had someone to talk to and maybe coach me,
Mhm.
with me to come up with ideas for my mom a few years prior, 5 years prior, we were great at getting, she wanted to go get the funeral arrangements, that kind of preparation. But as far as these other things of, creating legacies or legacy projects or making sure that those things that you want to say are not left unsaid and not wait until it's a hospice situation and someone's laying on their deathbed.
Mm. Yeah, I think the earlier that we can think about these things and get that support involved can be really powerful, because, there might be a sense of denial where thinking that you have more time than you really do have, and then all of that is really rushed and can create like scrambling and a sense of chaos, and just like, oh, well, now I don't have the time to do these things that actually would have been really important to me if I would have spent the time to do some preparation ahead of time. So I think, yeah, the sooner the better. And even like, I mean, I love thinking about these things and I'm not dying. Like, I have written down somewhere how I want my end of life to go, and all of my requests. So I think just like spending that time thinking about it and talking about it and having that plan written down can be really powerful, so that, when the reality hits and the person is in hospice or they're really declining rapidly, then you're not in your grief and in the overwhelm of the
Hmm.
situation trying to sort out these details. You have the support already in place. You have the game plan. You have the tools in your back pocket as far as how you're going to deal with the emotions that are coming up. All those things that you can kind of gather and prepare ahead of time that can really make the end, or even the years leading up to it, a very sacred transition. And I think can also help the people who are involved, the loved ones and the family members that are going to be living after this person passes. That creates an opportunity for them to process their grief and these changes as well, to kind of take them in little bite-sized chunks as
Yep.
things progress, to stop and digest that little piece so that we're not just like hit with all of it on the last day.
So I'm thinking about what might be some, I don't want to call them flags because I don't want it to be a negative, but what might be some things that could raise awareness for someone who's, I'm a caregiver and I'm taking care of my aging mother, my grandparents, or my parent has, or my loved one has been diagnosed with something. What might be a, uh, oh, what do I want to say? It almost is like a flag, but something like to flag me that I really need to start taking action and doing some of these things versus waiting until the end game, you know? Any thoughts on that? Like, are there things that when do you do it before they get sick? When they start having their health issues, what do you think that could look like?
Um, yeah, that's a really good question. I think a lot of things can be done for anybody listening way before when you're anticipating the end of life to be. I think someone for even my age, like I am not planning on dying anytime soon, but I also have the awareness that literally anything could happen and today could be my last day. So it's important for me, even ahead of time to start thinking about these things and having those conversations and planning some of that. So I think that it really can't be done too early because you can always go back and edit things as you go. I spoke with someone who every year she rewrites an obituary for herself
Mm,
and she reflects on how that would change as years go by. And that's a really meaningful project for her. Even though she's not, sick or ill or anything, it's just like, I think that creates a lot of power with really thinking about how we want our time and our life to go no matter how much time we have left, even if it is 50 years out, and you're using that awareness to really fuel a richer 50 years that you have. But then if
mhm.
someone is in that stage where they have the awareness that, okay, I've got a condition or I've got a diagnosis, or I'm getting old and these things are on my mind now, like as soon as that pops into your awareness, that would be a cue to start thinking about those things and getting the proper paperwork in place and having the conversations with the family members and maybe seeking out the kind of support that you might need, whether it is a death doula or getting something aligned with the funeral arrangements or whatever it might be. I think it kind of just depends on where you're at and what's important to you.
Yeah, I was just as you're talking about that, and I just realized that intuitively, like writing obituaries, that's my jam. Well, not the obituaries, but I love doing eulogies and I'm a certified celebrant. So that I love doing that because it's so precious to my heart to be able to connect with the family.
Mm,
But I was thinking back that we had a big family event when my mom was probably turned 80 or 85. And so I did this scrapbook and I wrote basically her eulogy
mm,
in that scrapbook, but she wasn't dying, she wasn't sick, she had 16 more years after that, but it was really about the impact that she had and the family that she created and who she was and
mm,
all of that. And now when I think about it, because I have that book, but it was almost like that created so we don't have to necessarily call it a eulogy, but how might we create an honoring of it, especially with like our parents and grandparents. I mean, that aging is going to happen. We're all going to die sometime. But, if you ever have an opportunity at a special event like a significant birthday or their anniversary, their 50th, 60th anniversaries, to where you could actually gather together and write something and have something that can go on long beyond their life, because I have that scrapbook now. I have the photo, I have what was written. And there was one other thing too, before my mom was living with us, but she still was very active and, pretty self-sufficient as long as she was in our home. And my brother had a daughter that he figured, well, she probably is not going to be, I don't know if grandma will be around because her
mm,
daughter wasn't dating or doing anything like that. And he asked my mom if he could record her sending a wish to my niece
mm,
while mom was really with it.
Mhm.
And, in case she couldn't be there, whether physically she couldn't because her health wasn't good or physically she couldn't because she had died. And she just got married last month and he held on to that for it's probably 6, 7 years old since he recorded that. And it was so beautiful and honoring. And it was my mom and her, you videotape just wishing her granddaughter this beautiful wedding day.
Wow.
So I think we kind of did some of that without even realizing that we were doing some of these really important things that also help in our post grieving, right? Not
Yeah.
post grieving because you can grieve forever, right? But after post death.
Right. I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. Like, yeah, when we can really show up for these milestones or think about these things ahead of time, that it really does create an opportunity for connection and
Yeah.
celebration and just embracing the life and the opportunities that are here right now, that we know we're not going to have forever. And I think that just makes those moments so much more juicy. And I think
Yes.
if we can
Yes.
have more moments like that throughout our entire life, just remembering, I love to remember every single day that like I could die. Like to me, it's really grounding because it gives me that opportunity to connect, to live fully, to make my time worthwhile, to be really intentional about how I'm living my life. Because if I go tomorrow, I don't want to regret not at least getting started the things that I want to be doing. And I think especially when we have the awareness that, yeah, wow, I got the terminal diagnosis or I'm aging and I'm really expecting these things to happen now, that just becomes that much more important and juicy to lean into those moments.
Yeah. And so as a death doula, speaking to the family members, the loved ones who are going to be remaining here and grieving the death of their loved one, um, I might be putting you on the spot, but what would you say for them, especially in this anticipatory grief that can be very long standing, could be years? What might be your top three um, tips, um, go to things for them to help them during this process, both in their relationship and their connection, but also in their own healing and health?
Yeah, wow, way to put me on the spot.
That's me.
I think this almost comes from more of a grief coach perspective
Okay, yep.
of just thinking about like what would be helpful, like what are your needs and how can you fulfill those. So I think like especially like you mentioned a lot of like we don't really realize that we're grieving maybe because it feels like it's really drawn out, or it kind of, that transition period has a sense of normalcy to it when it's
Mm,
prolonged after a while. And I think like even though it can feel normal for some people to be living in that space or to be a caretaker for a long time, to intentionally create those moments to tend to your grief, to reflect, to maybe have a conversation with someone about what's been going on, in your caretaker's life and in your life, whether it's journaling or making little audio messages to yourself or some way that you can just reflect on like the progress that's happening, to stop and to be present, to catch up with, the changes, even if they are very small, like how has this progressed and how am I feeling about it? What is coming up for me? How might I be able to, hold space for my emotions and process through some of the emotions? Um, and then also to recognize that, like, I think especially with caretakers, that you have your own life still. Like you said, like you kind of jump into that role and you just want to do, and you put on, the nurse hat or the caretaker role, and it's like that's my purpose. And then we kind of dismiss the rest of our lives in order
mhm.
to be here doing our purpose. So I think recognizing that it is okay to step away and to have someone else come in so that you can take a break. Even if it is just go home, take a shower, get some clean clothing, get yourself a nice meal, like those little things where it's like in order to sustain this and in order to make the most out of this process in whatever way, taking a break is really important. Um, and then I think, yeah, emotionally processing the grief and all the things that are coming up and finding the people in your life that can support you with that, whether it is, to help you take a break so that you can go off and have a normal day of something that's non-caretaker related, if that's important to you, or, just creating those moments where you allow yourself to cry in the shower and you allow yourself to break down and you allow yourself to feel it all. I think the presence with all of it is at the core of all of these practices. What does it mean to show up for myself and, my people, whoever's involved in this? What does that really mean to show up and be present with all of this? And how can I do that in a deeper way?
I love that. I love that. And I do think, I think death doulas, there's that, I think it could be an expansive role, right? But I do believe that it does get to like the core of what we do as coaches, and in grief coaching, it's not that someone has actually died all the time. It could be, it is watching that slow deterioration of your loved one or some other significant loss. And I think it's just, yes, that's what we do. So we're sharing that because that's our superpowers, right? That's where we want to be. And we love doing that. But for the people that are listening, I just want you to know that these are some core things. You know, find the time for yourself. And that's not always easy because you're busy and you don't realize it. See if you can find someone outside of your family network. We call it, creating your tribe in the Breathe coaching model, but finding one or two people outside of your family network that you can talk to now and just say, would you be willing to let me reach out to you? And can I just dump on you? Can I just can you just listen to me? Because I had that. Yeah, I had some close friends that understood because they had done, they watched similar things with their parents and they could give me some wisdom
Mm.
from that. And then how do you incorporate self-care? Because those of us that are in the midst of this, we forget to do that.
It's something that came to mind as you were speaking is this idea of ritual that can be applied to yourself, your self-care rituals,
Yeah.
and then also to ways to make those moments with your loved one like really precious when you have them, to mark that milestone. Like you mentioned, creating that project at a birthday celebration. They're not dead yet, but here's an opportunity to have some kind of an honoring practice or a ritual. And that can be really helpful for the grief process as well. Something tangible that our minds can grasp in a different way, to mark the progress, to mark how things are changing. And that can kind of help you just to make those moments more intentional and to be really present for, whether it's your ritual of taking a little bath or lighting a candle, or maybe you go and see your loved one at the nursing home every Tuesday and you do a puzzle
Yeah.
together. Like those things can be so meaningful as long as we're like intentional about making them meaningful.
And record your conversations. I so wish I would
Oh,
have just turned on the record button on my phone. I mean, I have a lot of videos and that type of thing, but just our conversations that we had, or the conversations with my grandmothers that, just were so beautiful and just simple because we'd just be sitting around chatting. Those things could have just been, not that you're infringing on anybody's privacy, let them know that, but it's just like, just go into a conversation, and we've got the technology today to be able to do some really cool things to have that connection live long past life here on earth.
I love that. Yeah, thinking about those ways that we can, support ourselves after the death has happened
Yep.
too. Like you mentioned, that grieving process before the death and then after the death are totally different. So with that in mind, knowing that that is approaching, how might we be able to have those moments of connection, like taking pictures or recording conversations or whatever it might be, the legacy project that we can connect with them, and even after they're gone, to help process the grief and wrap our heads around what has just happened, but then a way to just keep their memory and their energy here with us still. And that's comforting.
I love that. I love that. Well, this has been a great conversation. So, um, yeah, when we in our show notes, you're going to know how to connect with Cami. Um, and I think that's an important piece too, is just have a conversation. Either one of us, you can reach out to us because we can help you just like think through some of those things. if you want to, because that's what this person just reached out to me. She doesn't really know me that well. Her parents know me really well, and she's just like, I saw something you put on Facebook, and I just thought I need to talk to someone.
Mm.
I'm like, sure, because those of us that do this work, we're here to help in any way that we can. So, all our contact information will be in the show notes. But if you do like this, hit the like and subscribe button, because that's how you'll get these. Cami and I are just chatting. We're going to have other people on, or if you would like to be a guest on our show because you have a great story, some insights, some tools, motivation for people that are, grieving, whether it's the anticipatory or it's after, a deep loss, whatever that loss may be. We're looking always for guests for the show. And thank you, Cami. As always, I just love hanging out with you.
Same to you, Pat. Thank you. I always love thinking about the end of life, and yeah, I feel so much fuller, so much more intentional, and just like the life that we have is so precious. So thank you for that reminder. I love taking that with me through the rest of my day.
Cool, cool. All right. We'll see y'all later. Bye-bye.
See ya. Bye.